Hey, this is Mike Diercksen from Proactive, and you're listening to the Building Bite podcast. Tune in as we spotlight our guest, James Pappas, Team Vice President of Construction Professional Liability at Convex US. Our episode today is focused on Rectification 101, Rectification Done Right. For more information on this episode and others, please check out the Building Bite at www.buildwithproactive.com.
Welcome to the Building Bite Podcast, a podcast for construction contractors, owners, and insurance professionals, where you'll hear from the experts about key topics that'll help you be successful. I'm Chris Epps, a Vice President at Proactive, and I'm joined here with my co-host, Mike Diercksen, our Manager of Marketing and Business Development. We welcome our guest today, James Pappas. James is Team VP of Construction Professional Liability at Convex US. James, how are you this afternoon?
Doing fantastic. It's a beautiful fall day here in Queens, New York, and on the heels of a Mets comeback win last night, couldn't feel better.
Fantastic. Good time to catch up. Well, we got you in a good mood, man. We'll make it a good one. Mike, how about you? How are you this afternoon?
I'm doing good, Chris. James is riding high, so excited to jump into this one today.
Absolutely. Well, let's do it. James, definitely a pleasure to have you on the show. Before we dive in, we always like to give our listeners a little bit of insight into our guest's career path and kind of what led you to your role at Convex. But yeah, if you could give us a little background there, what got you into the seat where you are today?
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Happy to be here today. Appreciate the time spending with you guys, and should be a good one. I started off in the industry as a risk management insurance major at St. John's University. The Greenberg School of Risk Management has a dedicated program for risk management, quantitative risk, and actuarial science studies. Through that program, landed an internship at AXA XL about a decade ago, working in their Contractors Professional Liability business unit on the underwriting side. And since then, it's been a quick decade that's landed me here over at Convex. Really exciting opportunity we have here to build out a leading MGU for contractors' professional liability products. And that's what brought me here today.
You're our first guy who actually planned a career in insurance instead of just getting pulled in, kicking and screaming like the rest of us.
Absolutely. It's sort of just happened. Obviously the industry's been seeking, talent, I think, from the collegiate ranks for quite some time. So happy to fall into a great program at St. John's. That's put me in a great position to continue my career.
Yeah, and I know that there's several schools in the South that have a risk management major, but I think St. John's one of the only ones I know of in the Northeast as well. So interesting that you chose insurance instead of insurance choosing you. But anyway, diving into our main topic today, James, is Rectification 101, rectification done right? So Contractors Professional Liability includes rectification coverage, something that appears sometimes like not too many of our listeners or people in the industry fully understand. Would you be able to give us some insight as you understand the coverage and what the intent is behind it?
Absolutely. So first off, the genesis of any CPPI or contractor's professional offering is that third-party coverage, right? To provide contractor insureds the protection against third-party claims alleging any sort of negligence in their professional services. Professional services can extend far beyond design liability for contractors. It can be things such as field changes to design, collaboration and oversight of subcontractors, as well as general construction management oversight. So the breadth of professional services that the contractors undertaking have steadily increased over the past few decades, particularly with the growing design build delivery method that we now see on more projects than not these days. And rectification coverage is a first-party coverage that is typically accessible to a contractor under their CPPI policy. And rectification coverage is intended to help contractor insureds run towards a problem when they identify any sort of error or negligent professional services that would otherwise lead to a third-party professional liability claim. The coverage has grown over time. historically, rectification was limited to solely mitigating or rectifying design defects. The coverage under most policy forms has expanded to allow for rectification of all professional services that a contractor may undertake. So the value of this coverage, as contractors' exposures have increased in this space, is becoming even more important today than it was over the past 5 or 10 years. And we're excited to be here and shed some light on best practices and things to be mindful of. One of them that I would address is the difference between some of the first party coverages that are typically available to a contractor insured under a CPPI policy. So you have rectification, which allows you to run towards a problem on a job site when you identify those issues. But oftentimes, contractors' professional liability policies will also include protective indemnity coverage. Protective indemnity coverage functions a bit differently than rectification. Protective indemnity requires you, the contractor, to file a demand and suit against your subconsultant, and the protective indemnity coverage under the contractor's policy functions as excess indemnity. So if there is any loss that exceeds the available and recoverable amount of insurance under that subcontractor or subdesigner's policy, protective indemnity would provide excess coverage over top of that. Whereas rectification is often utilized and treated on a primary basis and is solely subject to the self-insured retention of the coverage part.
Gotcha. Yeah, and James, you going back to something you previously said, we've kind of seen this coverage as an alternative explode over the past 5 years and really start to take off. One of the things we've seen working on the claims side of things is insureds really getting tripped up a little bit when initially utilizing this coverage. When it's something new to them, it's got different reporting provisions, just general implementation of the policy and use of the policy when the rubber meets the road with respect to claims. Can you shed some light on maybe some of those specific reporting provisions and, how the policy in general is designed to work and, how it's a little bit different?
Absolutely. So 2 important provisions to keep in mind when looking at your CPPI policy and determining whether rectification is a viable recourse for an error on a project. First off, to your point, it's a claims made and reported coverage, right? The moment you identify that error in professional services that would otherwise lead to a professional liability claim, notice should be given to the carrier at that time. I think working with folks like you all at Proactive really allow us to get in front of these issues upon report and quickly determine the root cause of loss and to determine what those costs are. The second provision that's particularly important when looking at rectification coverage is incurring costs prior to notice. So I always like to put it into a pretty simplistic example of an auto accident. Let's say you got into a fender bender on the road and you realize you need to get your bumper replaced. At that moment, would you call up your insurance carrier to report a claim and let them know of the damages you incurred prior to fixing that bumper? Or would you go ahead to your local shop, fix the bumper, make those determinations on your own, and then call up your insurance carrier and ask them to foot the bill? When we're talking about incurring costs pre-tender, I think it's extremely important to understand that carriers view the relationship with their insureds as a partnership. And in order for us to best help our insureds effectively mitigate and rectify claims, we need to be in the know as soon as you are.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point there. And it truly is a partnership, and that's the benefit, right, of this being a first party policy, right? You can go directly to your partner carrier. It's in the carrier's best interest to help you mitigate these claims quickly to minimize the amount of loss down the road. But also it helps you kind of keep the ball moving, keep your project going forward. So personally, we think it's a really well-crafted policy, and not only in the transfer of risk, but like true risk mitigation that way. So you mentioned earlier that this policy helps you kind of run towards those problems. How do you see that? Is there some examples you have where you've had insureds kind of be able to tackle those problems head on and kind of perform that true risk mitigation?
Absolutely. I think the utilization of rectification coverage will only continue to increase as insureds are more aware of what's available under their policy, as well as the education between risk management and legal departments of the contractors with the project managers, superintendents, and the folks on the job site that are executing that day in and day out. I think one common theme is that no project manager or superintendent wants to feel like they've dropped the ball, right? So oftentimes what we've recognized is contractors have a we want to fix it ourselves mentality. And while that's extremely beneficial in terms of your operations, it may impact your coverage under the policy. So, a couple examples that I can think of are utilizing the coverage to get ahead of that problem and to fix it in a timely fashion in order to keep the project schedule intact, to circumvent the potential of any liquidated or consequential damages that may be incurred as a result of that project going over schedule, right? So the importance of the coverage and its utilization to protect not only the integrity of the job, but also to protect the reputation of our contractors, right? Who oftentimes are repeating a large amount of work for repeat clients and value both their subcontractor and sub-design relationships. Utilizing a coverage that puts the keys in your hand to go forward in partnership with your carrier are, I think, extremely important virtues of what the coverage is intended to do.
Yeah, you raise a good point there, James, in that reputational damage really not covered by the policy, but certainly impacted. If you can use that to your advantage to, like you said, avoid protracted fights over liquidated damages and extended costs, and just generally running over budget or having a project go south and souring a relationship with a good owner client, there's tremendous value in that just as a product with these professional policies. I guess given that it's kind of a newer coverage and sort of still in development I shouldn't say still in development. Policies are out there. A lot of contractors just getting sort of comfortable with starting to use them. But can you maybe walk us through some of the early indicators you see as to how it's impacting the industry and how that early engagement and intervention by the contractor and engaging the carrier, as soon as you're aware, and bringing in your broker and making sure you're all aligned in terms of expectations? How is that, allowing contractors to better use the policy as a tool and to help them avoid trouble on their projects?
Absolutely. And right, a tool or a coverage is only as good as you can implement it. So what we're seeing in terms of helping contractors recognize where potential issues may exist that should be escalated are, for example, just overall training of the coverage and the policy form with those project managers and superintendents and those folks on the job site, giving them a privy and opening the doors of trust and communication between those folks and the folks in legal and risk management are definitely ways to help incentivize questions, incentivize escalation of issues. It could be recognizing that a field change made to design has led to some unintended consequence, right? It could be recognizing that design specs provided aren't fit for the purpose of the particular job. So typically it's any sort of misunderstanding and or issue escalating on the job site that relates back to your professional services that oftentimes contractors with just a let's fix it on our own mentality often overlook the value and the added benefit of having rectification under your contractor's professional liability policy.
Yeah, I can tell you firsthand, we've seen that in practice where we're reviewing a rectification claim and we see, we're looking at pre-authorization, and there's a lot of times where we come back with the carrier and say, hey, it looks like you missed follow-up testing and inspection or retesting or, some element of scope that just, like you said, just hasn't been thought of by the GC because they're scrambling to resolve this problem real time. But when you raise that with your carrier and work through it with them, you're doing it with somebody who has seen dozens, if not hundreds of these claims, and can give you some real-time feedback and assistance. And it's maybe counterintuitive to how people think about insurance carriers, but there's actually a lot of, I think, positive benefit to that early engagement, as you suggest, that I have seen in my experience actually prevent contractors from leaving money on the table that could have been things that either ended up not covered, or they, started spending money before they had authorization, or for a litany of other reasons may not have been covered.
Absolutely. And, that brings some attention to particularly the language and the policy wordings of your program, right? To understand what's deemed a rectification expense as a defined term under the policy. And a couple of, I would say, misunderstandings are that, for one, the policy is not intended to provide any form of betterment. So those rectification expenses that an insured may incur should really be with our pre-authorization and costs that are deemed direct, reasonable expenses to get that project back online with the owner's desired outcome. And I think that understanding your policy language, particularly in terms of what rectification expenses, the reporting provisions around rectification, as well as making sure that there's no other challenges with policy wordings that would otherwise circumvent you having it respond how you intend, are extremely important.
Yeah, the thing that always comes back to me with this is just communication, right? Like any tool, any industry, it's the people that you work with, and it's the ability to communicate effectively, right? So if you have that clear line of communication, it makes all the difference when implementing, whether it's a risk mitigation strategy, any kind of business practice that way. So definitely great insights. And James, this has been an excellent conversation. We really appreciate you taking your time to speak with us. One thing we like to do on the show is always to leave our audience with a few takeaways. So keeping in mind that our audience is primarily made up of contractors, risk managers, brokers, carriers, what would you say the three big takeaways should be for our audience listening to today's episode?
First off, I'd say partnership with your insurance broker, your carrier, and subject matter experts that your carrier may retain, such as yourself, are extremely important to develop best practices around helping the risk management and legal department provide insights to how the coverage is intended to work and respond to the boots on the ground, and also to set the appropriate expectations around the intent of the coverage. I would say, secondly, report. Can't stress that enough. Oftentimes, one of the biggest hiccups on any claims made and reported policy is late reporting. And as the carrier, it's a difficult position to be put in when, even if it is some valid claim through other facts and circumstances, late reporting cripples our inability to get our hands dirty with you and work towards the best resolution possible. Lastly, I would say this has become even more important in recent years as there's been a lot of federal government investing into larger infrastructure projects across the country, is pre-qualification around subcontractors, subconsultants, subdesigners, right? We view pre-qual as a key risk mitigation tool to avoid project challenges, making sure folks are fit for the particular scope that they're bidding or the job that you're looking to bring them on. And it's important to note that rectification coverage extends to work done by or on your behalf. So even if it's not a self-performing scope of work, negligent design by a subcontractor or sub-engineer can be something that triggers your professional liability and rectification coverages. So the emphasis on pre-qualification has become extremely important as there's a lot of work out there and a lot of ambitions of contractors to grow in this market.
If there's going to be one thing I want our audience to take away from the Building Bite episodes, especially with SDI and rectification, is it's a partnership, right? I think we got to break that narrative that claims are combative, especially, and I guess everyone's got different experiences, but within these two lines of coverage, truly it has to be a partnership to make it work, right? So I think as far as the reporting aspect of that, the quicker you can get to a partnership level with your carrier partner and really be in it together, the better it's going to go for both of those lines of coverage.
Absolutely. And I would also add on that as well. Rectification is a vehicle and a coverage that we're offering because we see the value in early resolution. And often under rectification, the goal would be the direct costs to fix that error, to get that project back on track, not only saves the contractor's reputation, not only circumvents potential consequential and liquidated damages if the project's over schedule, but it's also, from the carrier's perspective, a very effective way to minimize the legal costs and expense that you would typically see under a third-party professional liability claim. So early resolution is absolutely the best approach in partnership with your broker, carrier, and with folks like Proactive.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with your three takeaways there, James, and also that final thought. It's like the cost doesn't go down over time. The longer it takes to resolve that problem, and the longer you're involved, and the more people you have to bring in, those costs can spiral. So I would absolutely put a stamp on everything you just said. In addition to that, if there were an immediate action item that our listeners could look to start working toward a solution or implementing this policy, what's the best starting place? What's step number one for your GC clients?
Yeah, I'd say knowledge sharing and open communication between the project team, right? So those project managers, those superintendents, and the risk management legal department. Oftentimes, the better those cultures are merged, the more proactive those folks can be in responding to identified errors in professional services. And the quicker you're able to notify your carrier partner of that, the quicker we're going to be able to get to resolution. I think every claim has unique nuances that can change the direction of how quickly it's closed out or how drawn out the process may be. But ultimately, getting in bed and I think having that open knowledge sharing with boots on the ground is a key strategy to help escalate those issues and ensure timely reporting.
Absolutely. Well, James, again, thank you so much for your time today. We always like to hit our guests with a couple rapid fire questions at the end here. So first and foremost, are there any trends that you're seeing right now, either positive or negative, when it comes to the market and how they're adopting rectification policy?
Absolutely. So the first one is how rectification expense is defined. I think historically that's been limited to design defects. And over time, as contractors have become more sophisticated in the professional exposures they're undertaking, there's been more of a direction tying those services to the professional services defined in your policy and not limiting them to solely design defects. I think that's an extremely important note to make in terms of trends and different carrier takes on what sort of errors can be rectified. Secondly, I would say something that we often see in the marketplace is rectification coverage either provided at a sublimit of liability or with a higher self-insured retention than the true third-party professional liability coverage, which our approach on the underwriting side is to harmonize both limits and retention between your third-party professional liability coverage and your first-party rectification coverage. We want to incentivize you and not present a challenge where either you're sublimited to 2 million on rectification, but you have a 10 million limit of liability on your professional coverage. We think that puts everyone in a bit of an adversarial position when rubber hits the road, because oftentimes under these rectification claims, you don't have a clear understanding of the cost of the fix until you're down the road. And I think it puts both the insured and the carrier in a bit of an adversarial position when there's a sublimit that's going to affect the full extent of rectification required. Similarly with retentions, right? We want to incentivize our insureds to come to us and report those matters before the subsequent third-party suit. And our perspective is by offering a higher self-insured retention on the rectification coverage versus the professional liability coverage, it's quite the opposite message. So I think harmonizing those professional liability and rectification limits on placements where you're purchasing that policy are extremely important, and some trends that we're definitely taking note of in the industry and marketplace.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing that jumps out at me, James, like we said, going back to it, you chose insurance, right? You kind of jumped into this policy line beginning with AXA XL as you've grown into your career. So what is it that makes you the most excited about this product and the work you're doing right now?
Absolutely. So, in June of 23, joined Convex US, which is a wholly backed and owned MGU of Convex Group, whom was founded in 2019 and has headquarters in Bermuda, operations in London, and the US MGU over the last 2 to 3 years has been building out its presence here stateside. Really excited to have this rare opportunity to work alongside folks with a proven track record, also doing it with the long-term capacity support of Convex Group. And the team we have here at Convex US in the construction professional liability is a fantastic team of underwriters that have experience in many different areas of the market, and really with one common goal in mind, to be client-centric focused, right? We're providing coverage to our contractors, we're working with our broker partners, and we need to continue to be attentive to their ever-changing needs and also ensure that we're providing best-in-class service when we're being given opportunities.
Yeah, it's a people business, so it's great to like your team and to have a like-minded vision there. So, James, this has been a wonderful conversation. As we do with all of our episodes, the Building Bite. It stands for Building Insurance Technology with the Experts. Now, you're in Queens. I know you're in New York City, my old home. What are you taking the bite out of today? Where's the best place to grab a bite to eat around you?
I think it's going to be some good Greek food. I mean, there's plenty to find here in Astoria, Queens, and I think after that Mets comeback win last night, it'll be time to take a good bite into souvlaki or gyro tonight.
Is there a preferred place? Like, is there the best place in town, a famous spot, or is just any Greek place in Queens?
Taverna Kyklaris is a namesake here. I mean, you typically have folks from all over the tri-state area coming in for a meal. So have the luxury of being walking distance for me, and that might be the choice of bite tonight.
My brother lives out that way, so that's definitely going to be on my menu next time I get down there.
There you go, Absolutely. Mike. Yeah, Greek food and grape leaves for Thanksgiving.
There you go.
All right. Well, James, thank you for joining us today. We definitely appreciate your time. If our listeners want to hook up with you after the episode airs, where can they find you? Email, LinkedIn? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. James Pappas on LinkedIn. Happy to connect and continue this conversation with folks that are interested in discussing more. Or email first name James dot last name Pappas at convexin.com. And please reach out if you want to chat some more.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for your time. We enjoyed it and look forward to having you back on soon.
Awesome. Mike and Chris, appreciate it as always. And let's go Mets.
Thank you for listening to The Building Bite. This podcast has been brought to you by Proactive. Check us out on thebuildingbite.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all future The Building Bite news and updates. You can also find us on your favorite apps, including Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Amazon. If you have ideas for episode topics that we should cover on the show, or you know somebody who would be a perfect guest, let us know at connect@thebuildingbite.com.